Welcome to Chillers and Thrillers Extra, paranormal stories just for my YouTube subscribers. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get started. The Tree, submitted by user mission-granola. Once in the hills of Northern California, I found a strange-looking tree in an open meadow near a cliff above a densely forested canyon. The tree had an odd growth pattern. I don't remember exactly what kind of tree it was, maybe a buckeye. It seemed quite old and had kind of gnarly but still neatly grown branches that made a flat-bottomed canopy and had some exposed roots. The tree was tiny though, only about 7 feet tall. I had been walking all day and decided to lay down for a nap under it because it just looked like that's what it was made for. Soon after I lay down, I got a weird urge to grab my knife off my belt that kept nagging at me and got stronger, so I grabbed it. Then, I got another powerful urge to open the blade and hold it to my chest, which kind of scared me. It didn't feel like a voice in my head telling me to do it, but the urges definitely seemed somehow separate from myself. And part of my brain was aware of it, while another part just obeyed it. When I started pushing the point of the knife down into my chest, I got this dreadful feeling washing over me, and I snapped to my senses and threw the knife down and scrambled to my feet. As soon as I was out from under that tree, that sense of evil went away. It was such a strange-looking tree standing all alone in the middle of this field, and such an uncanny feeling that I left right away. The Man That Wasn't There, submitted by user Disgruntled Pelicanbrief. Years ago, I would get up early to go for a run before work. This was at about 5:30 to 6 in the morning before the sun was fully up, and it was almost always pretty dark. I'd leave my apartment, walk straight across a patch of grass in a small parking lot towards the park, then run on the sidewalk through a grassy, leafy area that only had a few streetlight-type lamps every 200 yards or so. I started my run and was looking at the sidewalk in front of my feet when I saw a dark shadow, a solid figure at the last moment before collision. I stopped mid-stride, and inches from my face there was a man standing there, holding a dog on a leash. It wasn't unusual to see people walking dogs in the park, but not usually at the exact spot or so early in my run. It all happened instantaneously, so it was almost after the fact that I was able to notice the details. There was this grim, expressionless man wearing a peaked cap and a solid khaki-colored uniform of some sort. It struck me as military and old-fashioned, but I only had a split second to try not to crash into him. The dog he was holding onto was black, large, and similar to a Rottweiler. It wasn't moving, and it wasn't making a sound either, but it was drooling. Full-on, froth dripping from its mouth. They weren't looking at me, but staring past me. They weren't looking at me, but staring past me, across the park towards the apartments. It wasn't a leash the man was holding, but a thick metal chain. He was standing stock still and not looking at me or making any expression at all, despite the fact that my face almost hit his, and I yelled out, "Oh my gosh, I didn't see you," before leaping away and continuing on my run. Only after I moved away did it occur to me that they had been standing directly in the path in front of me, and somehow I had not seen their entire approach towards the park. There was no way they could have appeared in the middle of that sidewalk from any direction, and I not would have seen them coming. But they hadn't looked at me. The man hadn't even blinked. I turned and looked back over my shoulder, and the path was empty. The Camping Trip, submitted by user Kerri M. This happened to a friend and I on a camping trip to a really remote national park in the south. The first night, we lost our tent in an intense sandstorm that blew in from the south and ended up having to sleep in the Jeep. We were inside the Jeep just killing time while the storm was going on and hoping it would be over quickly. We were both just sitting in the front seats. I was on my Kindle and my friend was playing a game on her phone, when I started to hear something coming from the back passenger side of the car. I thought it sounded like voices, but it was muffled, so I brushed it off as the wind. But I kept hearing it. I didn't say anything because I did not want to freak out my friend. But this particular campsite was well off the beaten path, and it would have been very unusual to have anyone just wandering by, especially at night. My friend eventually turned and looked at the same back window that I had been hearing the voices from, and it was then that I knew she could hear them as well. If you've never been in a dust storm before, I have to say that it is surprisingly loud, and the wind was so strong it was rocking the Jeep back and forth. So I told my friend that it was probably the Jeep making a noise as the wind rocked it, but you could hear at least 3 different men's voices. It did not sound like yelling, more like casual joking back and forth. At this point, I was thinking it was hikers that got lost and they were using the Jeep as a windbreak. But then, why didn't they alert us to being out there? My friend and I were talking through all the possibilities when a loud laugh made us 100% sure there were men standing next to our car. We were 2 females alone and a bunch of dudes were joking next to a Jeep, not saying anything to let us know they were there. That's just not normal, and it made us very anxious, so I decided to go out there to see if they needed any help. I got my firearm and a flashlight and opened the driver's side door. When I first opened the door, I got it open a couple of feet before it slammed back on me. The wind was just that strong. I pushed it open again and hopped out quickly so I would not get slammed. I yelled out something lame like, "Hey guys, y'all need any help?" But I didn't get an answer. I walked around to the back of the Jeep where they were, all while it felt like a sandblaster was going off in my face. And there was no one there. It was pitch black, but I had a high-powered flashlight, and I circled the car, scanning the light around our campsite. But there was no one. This campsite is in the low desert, and you can see pretty far even in the storm, and there are not any formations close by to hide behind. After getting back into the Jeep, the voices started up again. Again, I got out and did a sweep, but nothing. I crawled into the backseat of the car to see if any of our gear was making a noise, and nothing. It did eventually fade away, and I remembered later that our campsite was near a historic site in the park where a massacre happened during the Mexican expedition in the early 1900s. I keep thinking that maybe what we heard were voices from the men who had died. William Reed, submitted by user Stesman04. When I was in high school, myself and 5 or 6 friends were always going ghost hunting. Normally, we would just visit old abandoned houses, old cemeteries, and the likes. We never had an experience except hearing weird noises here and there. However, one night, that changed, and this still gives me chills to this day. My buddy had found an old tombstone that was all by itself in a little part of land of a gated community. A little backstory. Supposedly, the gated community was built on an Indian burial ground. We pulled up to the tombstone around 1:30 in the morning, and there were 5 of us. 3 of my friends went to a little pond thinking that they had seen something. My buddy and I went over to the tombstone, which was really faded and worn down. We had no light except for a Bic lighter, which my buddy was using while I was cleaning off the tombstone. The only part we could make out was William and an 18 in the dates. I spent a few minutes trying to trace the name and dates. Out of nowhere, a man appears behind us and says, his name was William A. Reed, and he died in 1893. He repeated this exact phrase 3 times, turned around, and walked away. The man looked real, except his eyes were just black. He walked away with no flashlight or anything, and never said another word. As soon as the man turned around, our three friends at the pond were screaming and running back to the car. The story they told us was that they saw a full skull appear over the lake, as if it had been grafted on it. I never knew if I could believe their stories, but the screams did start as soon as our experience ended. The Coyote, submitted by user HeyJohnnyUtah. Take it for what it's worth. This didn't happen to me, but a very close friend of mine. I've heard a lot about coyotes and skinwalkers and had a weird experience or two with coyotes, but never experienced anything paranormal, so to speak. My friend Patrick's story, however, kept me from going back to a favorite backcountry secret stash. Patrick was leaving the area one morning and had been camping there a couple of days. He said that there was a coyote that always seemed to be close by, like in his peripheral vision, but never overtly in front of him. He loaded his truck and started to drive down the washout to the fire road. At the end of the wash, he could see the coyote following him. When he pulled onto the road, it was running next to him, so he sped up. He said he was going around 45 or so, and the coyote was running along beside him. Definitely not possible. When he looked back, the coyote was running on 2 legs and was wearing what Patrick said looked like buckskin pants. An instant later, it was a person wearing a coyote fur keeping pace with his truck. When he looked again, it was gone. We never went back to the grove after that. Much too freaky. Thank you for listening. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more spooky stories.